The snowstorm began without warning. It had been an unusually cold December in the small town of Black Hollow, Montana. Nestled deep in the Rocky Mountains, the town was used to harsh winters, but nothing could prepare its residents for the blizzard that struck on Christmas Eve. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow fell in relentless sheets, piling into drifts that swallowed fences and cars whole. Emma Harper, a single mother of a bright-eyed 6-year-old named Lily, had been on the road that evening, heading to her parents' house for Christmas dinner. The warmth of her childhood home, the smell of pine and cinnamon, and the sight of twinkling lights on the tree had been all she could think about for days. After a tough year, filled with job struggles and the sting of loneliness, Emma had wanted nothing more than to give Lily a magical Christmas. One full of love and laughter to remind her daughter that better days were ahead. The road ahead, however, had other plans. "Mommy, are we almost there?" Lily's small voice piped up from the back seat. Muffled under layers of scarves and jackets, her cheeks were rosy, and her breath fogged the air inside the car as she clutched her stuffed bunny. "Almost, sweetheart," Emma lied gently, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The truth was, she couldn't see more than a few feet in front of her. The headlights of the car barely pierced through the dense, swirling snow. Her heart raced as the tires skidded slightly on the icy road. Every passing minute felt heavier, as if the storm itself were closing in on them. Suddenly, the car jolted, the engine sputtered, and the dashboard lights dimmed. Emma's stomach dropped. She quickly guided the vehicle to the side of the road, her breaths quick and shallow. "No, no, no," she muttered under her breath, turning the key in the ignition again and again, but the engine refused to come to life. "Why are we stopping?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with worry. "The car's just taking a little break," Emma replied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out cell service, and they hadn't seen another car in over an hour. Panic began to creep in. Emma stepped out of the car into the bone-chilling cold. The wind hit her like a wall, biting at her exposed skin as she scanned the surroundings. All she could see was an endless expanse of white. Trees lined the horizon, their branches weighed down with snow, but there were no signs of help. No lights from passing cars, no houses, just the overwhelming silence of the storm. Returning to the car, Emma wrapped Lily in a blanket and tried to stay calm. "We'll just wait for the storm to pass," she said, her voice quivering despite her attempt at reassurance. Inwardly, though, she was terrified. The temperature was plummeting rapidly, and the car offered little protection from the freezing cold without the engine running. Hours passed. The windows of the car frosted over, and Emma's fingers and toes began to numb. She held Lily close, her heart breaking at the thought of her little girl spending Christmas Eve like this, cold, scared, and far from the warmth of family. Just when the weight of despair threatened to overwhelm her, a faint sound broke through the howling wind. A meow. Emma blinked, thinking she must be imagining it. But then it came again, clearer this time. A cat? Out here? Emma turned to the windshield and squinted through the frosted glass. At first she saw nothing. Then, emerging from the wall of white like a ghost, a small figure appeared. A cat. Its fur was thick and snow-dappled, a mix of gray and white that made it almost blend into the surroundings. But its eyes, bright, piercing green, cut through the storm like beacons. "What is it, Mommy?" Lily asked, her voice faint. It's a cat," Emma said, astonished. The animal approached the car with purpose, as if it had been searching for them. It leaped gracefully onto the hood of the car and peered through the windshield, meeting Emma's gaze with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. For a moment, Emma hesitated. Surely this was a coincidence, a stray animal lost in the storm like them. But the cat's behavior was deliberate. It pawed at the windshield and meowed again, louder this time, almost as if it were urging them to follow. "Mommy, I think it wants us to go," Lily whispered, her voice filled with childlike wonder. Emma didn't know what else to do. Staying in the car meant freezing to death, and the cat seemed determined to lead them somewhere. With a deep breath, she bundled Lily up in every piece of clothing she could find and opened the car door. "All right," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's follow the cat." The snow came up to Emma's knees as she carried Lily in her arms. The cat darted ahead, pausing every few feet to look back and make sure they were following. It moved with an uncanny sense of direction, as if it knew exactly where it was going. The icy wind clawed at Emma's face, and her legs burned with every step, but she pushed forward, fueled by a desperate hope. The cat led them toward the line of trees in the distance. Emma's heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation. Could this be the answer to their prayers? Or was it a cruel twist of fate, leading them deeper into the storm? The cat stopped at the edge of the forest, its tail flicking impatiently as it waited for them to catch up. When they finally reached it, Emma noticed something remarkable: paw prints in the snow that weren't being covered by the storm. It was as if the cat's path was protected, untouched by the chaos around them. "Mommy, it's magic," Lily said softly, her voice filled with awe. Emma didn't respond, but a spark of hope ignited in her chest. Wherever this cat was leading them, it had to be better than staying in the car. With the mysterious feline guiding their way, they plunged into the forest, unaware of the challenges that still lay ahead and the miracle that awaited them. The forest was eerily quiet, except for the crunch of snow beneath Emma's boots and the distant howl of the wind. The storm had lessened slightly, its fury muted by the towering pines, but the cold was relentless, cutting through even the thickest layers of clothing. Emma's arms ached from holding Lily, and her legs felt like lead as she trudged after the cat. The feline moved with a grace that defied logic, navigating the snow with ease. Every few steps it would stop, turn its head, and glance back at Emma and Lily as if urging them onward. Its green eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, radiating an almost supernatural sense of purpose. "Mommy, where do you think it's taking us?" Lily whispered, her voice muffled against Emma's shoulder. "I don't know, sweetheart," Emma replied, her breath coming out in short, visible puffs. "But we have to trust it. We don't have any other choice." Emma's practical mind screamed at her to stop, to turn back to the car and wait for help. But deep down, she knew staying there would mean certain death. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the storm wasn't finished yet. She had heard stories about people freezing to death in weather like this, how exhaustion could lull them into a sleep they never woke from. The thought terrified her, and every step felt like a battle against that creeping exhaustion. The deeper they went into the forest, the darker it became. Snow clung to the branches above, blocking out what little light remained in the stormy sky. Emma stumbled over hidden roots and rocks, clutching Lily tightly to keep from falling. Her breaths were shallow and ragged, each one an effort. The cat, however, never faltered. It moved ahead with unwavering confidence, as if it knew exactly where safety lay. Emma began to wonder if it really was something more than just a cat. Its behavior was so strange, so purposeful. "Do you think it's an angel?" Lily asked suddenly, her wide eyes peeking out from beneath her woolen hat. Emma's throat tightened at the question. She wanted to laugh it off, to brush it aside as childish imagination, but in truth, she didn't know. "Maybe," she said quietly, "maybe it's our Christmas miracle." But miracles, Emma knew, weren't supposed to be this hard. The forest grew thicker, the trees pressing closer together as the path narrowed. Emma's legs trembled, threatening to give out with every step, and she could feel her strength fading. Lily, sensing her mother's struggle, clung to her neck in silence, her small body shivering against Emma's chest. Then came the sound. At first, Emma thought it was the wind, but as they moved deeper into the woods, the noise grew louder, a low, rumbling growl that sent a chill down her spine. She froze, her heart pounding in her ears, and the cat stopped too, its body tense and alert. "Mommy, what is it?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Emma said, her voice barely audible. She scanned the trees, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but the growing darkness made it impossible to see. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable snap of a branch. Emma's blood turned to ice. Something was out there. Something big. The cat arched its back and hissed, its fur bristling as it faced the direction of the sound. Emma's grip on Lily tightened, and every instinct screamed at her to run, but she didn't know which way to go. The forest was a maze, and without the cat, they would be hopelessly lost. Then she saw it, a flash of movement between the trees. A hulking, shadowy figure moved just beyond the edge of her vision. Emma's breath caught in her throat. A bear. The massive creature stepped into the clearing, its dark fur blending with the shadows of the forest. Its eyes glinted with a predatory gleam, and its snout flared as it caught their scent. Emma's mind raced, her thoughts a blur of panic and fear. She knew there was no way she could outrun it, not in this snow, not with Lily in her arms. The cat, however, didn't back down. It stood its ground, its tiny body dwarfed by the towering bear. For a moment, Emma thought it would flee, leaving them to their fate. But instead, it let out a loud, piercing yowl that echoed through the forest. The bear paused, startled by the unexpected sound. The cat hissed again, its tail lashing back and forth like a whip. It took a step forward, planting itself firmly between Emma and the bear, as if daring the larger animal to come closer. Emma couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was absurd, this tiny creature challenging a predator so much larger and stronger than itself. But the cat's bravery seemed to work. The bear hesitated, sniffing the air uncertainly. It took another step forward, then stopped, as if weighing its options. "Please," Emma whispered, clutching Lily tightly. "Please, just go away." The cat yowled again, louder this time, its voice rising above the howling wind. The sound was so sharp, so commanding, that even Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. The bear let out a low grunt, its ears flattening against its head. It stared at the cat for a long, tense moment before finally turning and lumbering back into the trees. Emma's knees gave out, and she sank into the snow, her body shaking with relief. She clutched Lily tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking, the cat, God, or some other force she couldn't name. The cat turned to look at her, its green eyes softening. It let out a gentle meow, as if to say, "It's not over yet," and began walking again, its tail held high. Emma forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling as she followed. The encounter with the bear had drained what little strength she had left, but she couldn't stop now. Wherever this cat was leading them, she had to believe it was somewhere safe. The storm was beginning to wane, the snowfall lightening and the wind dying down, but the cold was still unbearable. Emma's fingers and toes were numb, and she could feel the creeping edges of frostbite. Lily's face was pale, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "We're going to make it," Emma whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Lily or herself. "We have to." The cat led them deeper into the forest, its movements steady and sure. Emma stumbled after it, her breath shallow and labored. She was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that she almost didn't notice when the trees began to thin, revealing a faint, golden light in the distance. Her heart leapt. Could it be? The cat let out a triumphant meow and quickened its pace, its tail flicking with excitement. Emma's steps faltered as she followed, tears streaming down her face as the light grew brighter closer. And then, through the trees, she saw it, a small cabin, its windows glowing with the warm, inviting light of a fire. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a wreath hung on the door, a symbol of hope in the darkness. Emma let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling as she stumbled toward the cabin. The cat darted ahead, leaping onto the porch and pawing at the door as if to announce their arrival. Emma clutched Lily tightly as she reached the cabin, her frozen fingers fumbling to knock. The door opened almost immediately, and a man stood there, his face lined with age and concern. "Dear God," he murmured, ushering them inside. Come in, you're safe now." As the warmth of the fire enveloped her, Emma collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling with relief. The cat sat by the hearth, its green eyes watching her with quiet satisfaction. For the first time that night, Emma allowed herself to believe they would be okay. The cabin was small and rustic, the kind of place that seemed like it belonged in a fairy tale. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning wood and faint traces of cinnamon, and the warmth was overwhelming after the bone-chilling cold of the storm. Emma blinked as her vision adjusted to the dim light. For the first time in what felt like hours, she could breathe without her lungs feeling like they were being pierced by shards of ice. The man who had opened the door knelt beside her, his weathered hands carefully pulling a blanket around her shoulders. He was in his late 60s, his silver hair tucked under a woolen hat and his blue eyes filled with concern. His name was Thomas Gray, though Emma didn't know that yet. "My God," he said again, his voice thick with shock. "You're frozen half to death." What were you doing out there in a storm like this? Emma struggled to speak, her lips trembling from both the cold and the emotional weight of the night. The car broke down, she stammered. We didn't know where to go. The cat, it led us here. Thomas's eyebrows furrowed, his gaze shifting to the cat, which now sat perched on the hearthrug in front of the fire. Its thick fur was dry despite the snowstorm, and its green eyes gleamed in the firelight, almost as if it were pleased with itself. That cat? Thomas asked, his tone incredulous. Emma nodded, pulling Lily closer to her chest. The little girl had fallen silent, her cheeks pale, but her eyes wide as she stared at the cat. It saved us, Emma whispered. It showed us the way. Thomas's expression softened, though his confusion lingered. Well, whatever brought you here, you're lucky. The storm's the worst we've seen in years. Most folks wouldn't have made it far out there. He rose to his feet and gestured to a worn leather couch by the fire. Sit there, he said gently. Let me get you something warm to drink, and we'll need to check you both for frostbite. Emma nodded weakly, barely able to stand as she made her way to the couch. She sank into the cushions, pulling Lily onto her lap and wrapping the blanket tighter around them both. The heat from the fire seeped into her frozen limbs, painful at first, but gradually soothing. The cat stretched languidly, its tail curling around its paws as it watched them. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a stray animal. There was something almost knowing in its gaze, as if it understood everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. Thomas returned moments later with 2 steaming mugs of cocoa, the smell of chocolate and marshmallows filling the room. He handed one to Emma and held the other to Lily's lips, encouraging her to take small sips. There you go, sweetheart, he said kindly. That'll warm you right up. Thank you, Emma said softly, her voice cracking with emotion. Thomas waved her thanks away. You don't need to thank me, just glad I heard that knock on the door. I don't get many visitors out here, especially not on Christmas Eve. Emma glanced around the cabin, noticing for the first time how cozy and lived in it felt. Strings of lights hung along the walls, and a small Christmas tree stood in the corner, its ornaments glittering in the firelight. A stack of wood was neatly piled beside the hearth, and a bookshelf overflowed with well-worn volumes. Do you live here alone? She asked, her voice tentative. Thomas nodded, his gaze distant for a moment before he spoke. I do. My wife passed a few years back. Kids are grown and scattered across the country. It's just me in the forest now. Emma's heart ached at the loneliness in his voice, and for a moment she forgot about her own struggles. I'm sorry, she said gently. Thomas gave a small shrug, his lips curling into a faint smile. Don't be. I've got the trees, the mountains, and a fire to keep me company. And tonight, well, I guess I've got the 2 of you. Lily, who had been quiet until now, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. And the cat, she added. Thomas chuckled, glancing at the feline. And the cat, though I've got no idea where it came from. I've never seen it around here before. Emma stared at the cat, her mind spinning. It had seemed so purposeful, so determined to lead them here. But how could that be? Cats didn't just do things like that. As if sensing her thoughts, the cat stood, stretching its sleek body before trotting over to the couch. It leapt onto the cushions and curled up beside Lily, its fur brushing against her small hand. Lily giggled softly, stroking its back. Mommy, I think it likes us, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Emma managed a faint smile, though her heart was heavy with questions. I think you're right. The storm raged on outside, the wind rattling the windows and the snow piling up against the door. But inside the cabin, there was a sense of peace, a fragile bubble of safety that Emma clung to with all her strength. Hours passed. Lily fell asleep on the couch, her head resting against Emma's chest, while Thomas stoked the fire and prepared a simple meal of soup and bread. Emma's body began to thaw, the stiffness in her limbs easing as the warmth of the room worked its magic. But as the night deepened, so did her thoughts. She couldn't stop thinking about the cat, how it had found them in the storm, how it had led them through the forest, how it had stood its ground against a bear. It didn't make sense. Do you believe in miracles? She asked suddenly, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Thomas paused, his hand hovering over the firewood. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think," he said slowly, "that miracles come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're big and flashy, like something out of a storybook. Other times, they're small, quiet, easy to miss if you're not paying attention." Emma nodded, her gaze drifting to the cat, which was now curled up beside the fire. "I think this is one of those times," she murmured. Thomas followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were seeing the cat in a new light. "Maybe it is," he said softly. The rest of the night passed in a haze of warmth and quiet conversation. Outside, the storm began to subside, the wind dying down and the snow tapering off into a gentle flurry. By the time dawn broke, the world outside the cabin was transformed, a pristine, glistening expanse of white under a pale blue sky. Emma stood by the window, holding Lily in her arms as they watched the sunrise. The cat sat at her feet, its tail twitching lazily. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. The dawn light poured through the cabin windows, soft and golden, melting away the horrors of the night before. Emma stood at the window, cradling Lily in her arms. Outside, the storm had vanished, leaving behind a landscape of glistening snow that sparkled like a field of diamonds. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with ice and snow, and the world seemed peaceful, as if the chaos of the storm had never happened. The cat was sitting by the door, its green eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her shiver. It meowed softly, a sound that seemed to carry a message, though Emma couldn't quite understand it. Thomas came up behind her, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. "Looks like the worst of it's over," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "Once the roads are clear, we can get you and Lily back to town." Emma nodded, though a part of her didn't want to leave the safety of the cabin. She glanced at Lily, who was still half asleep in her arms, her small face peaceful in the morning light. "I don't know how to thank you," Emma said, her voice breaking. "If it weren't for you, and for that cat, I don't think we would have made it." Thomas smiled, his weathered face softening. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "And as for the cat, well, I've been out here long enough to know when something isn't just a coincidence." Emma's gaze returned to the cat, which was now pawing at the door. "Do you think it knows something we don't?" she asked hesitantly. Thomas chuckled. "Maybe. Cats have a way of surprising you." The cat meowed again, more insistently this time, and scratched at the door. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Looks like your friend's ready to go," he said. Emma hesitated. The thought of stepping back out into the snow, even with the storm gone, made her stomach twist. But the cat's behavior was as purposeful as it had been the night before, and she couldn't ignore the strange pull she felt toward it. "I think it wants us to follow it," she said finally. Thomas looked at her, his expression serious. "Are you sure that's a good idea? You've already been through enough." Emma nodded, a quiet determination settling over her. "It led us to safety once," she said. "I have to trust it." Thomas didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed his coat and boots, motioning for Emma to do the same. "If you're going out there, I'm coming with you," he said firmly. With Lily bundled up in her arms and Thomas by her side, Emma stepped out into the snow. The air was crisp and cold, but the storm's fury had been replaced by a serene stillness. The cat trotted ahead, its tail held high as it moved through the snow with the same confidence it had shown the night before. The path that led them down was different from the one they had taken through the forest. This one was smoother, clearer, as if the cat had chosen a route designed to make their journey easier. Thomas kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, his rifle slung over his shoulder just in case. "This is strange," he muttered as they walked. "I've lived out here for years, and I don't think I've ever seen this trail before." Emma didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the cat, which seemed to glide over the snow like a ghost. Lily, still groggy from sleep, rested her head on Emma's shoulder, her small arms wrapped around her mother's neck. The journey felt endless, the snow crunching beneath their boots, the only sound in the quiet morning. But just as Emma's legs began to tremble with exhaustion, the trees parted, revealing a sight that took her breath away. In the distance, nestled in a small clearing, was the outline of a parked vehicle. As they got closer, Emma's heart leapt. She recognized it immediately. It was a snowplow, its bright orange frame gleaming in the sunlight. Beside it stood a man in a heavy coat, leaning against the plow as he sipped from a thermos. He looked up as they approached, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Are you folks all right?" he called out, setting the thermos down and hurrying toward them. Emma felt her knees buckle with relief. "Our car broke down," she said, her voice trembling. "We were stranded all night, but this cat, it led us here." The man looked at her, then at the cat, which was now sitting calmly in the snow, grooming its paws as if it hadn't just performed a miracle. He shook his head in disbelief. "You're lucky I decided to check this area," he said. "Most of the main roads are still blocked, but I thought I'd take a look down here, just in case." Thomas stepped forward, his tone grateful but firm. "Do you have room to take them back to town? The little one's been through a lot." The man nodded. "Of course, let's get you warmed up first." As he helped them into the cab of the snowplow, Emma turned to look at the cat. It sat a few feet away, its green eyes meeting hers with a look that felt almost final. "Come on," she called to it, patting her leg. "You're coming with us." But the cat didn't move. Instead, it stood, stretched, and began to walk away, its paw prints barely leaving an impression in the snow. "Wait," Emma cried, starting to climb out of the cab, but Thomas gently pulled her back. "Let it go," he said softly. "It's done what it came to do." Emma watched helplessly as the cat disappeared into the trees, its gray and white fur blending perfectly with the snowy landscape. Her heart ached with an inexplicable sense of loss, but at the same time she felt an overwhelming gratitude. The snowplow rumbled to life, and the man drove them back toward town, the heat blasting through the vents as they left the forest behind. Lily dozed off in Emma's lap, her small hand clutching Emma's coat, and Emma stared out the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. By the time they reached the outskirts of Black Hollow, the sun was high in the sky, melting the snow on the roads and rooftops. The man dropped them off at the town's small clinic, where doctors quickly tended to their frost-bitten fingers and toes. As Emma sat in the waiting room, holding Lily close, she couldn't stop thinking about the cat. It had come into their lives so suddenly, so inexplicably, and just as suddenly, it had vanished. But its impact remained. Thomas sat beside her, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "You know," he said after a long silence, "I've always believed that the world has a way of looking out for us, even when we don't expect it. Maybe that cat was part of that." Emma nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It was more than just a cat," she said softly. "It was a miracle." Emma sat by the window of her small apartment in Black Hollow, staring out at the fresh snow that blanketed the world in silence. A week had passed since that harrowing Christmas Eve, but the events of that night still lingered in her mind. The warmth of her hands wrapped around a cup of tea did little to thaw the memories of the cold, the fear, or the unshakable awe of what she'd experienced. Lily was playing by the Christmas tree, her giggles filling the room as she carefully placed tiny ornaments on its lower branches. The storm had delayed their holiday celebration, but Emma didn't mind. They were safe, alive, and together. That was more than enough. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a single framed photo. It wasn't much, just a simple snapshot that Thomas had taken before they left his cabin. Emma holding Lily, both of them bundled in borrowed blankets, with the cat sitting serenely at their feet. She had stared at that photo countless times since coming home, her heart swelling with gratitude and a bittersweet ache. The cat had disappeared into the forest that morning, and despite her and Thomas's best efforts to find it in the days that followed, there had been no sign of it. It was as if it had never existed at all. But Emma knew better. That cat had been as real as the snow beneath her feet and the fire that had warmed her frozen body. It had saved her and Lily, leading them to safety with a determination that defied explanation. "Mommy," Lily called, pulling Emma from her thoughts. She turned to see her daughter holding a drawing in her tiny hands. "Look, I drew the cat." Emma smiled as she took the drawing. It was simple, but unmistakable, a gray and white cat with bright green eyes, sitting in a snowy forest. In the corner of the page, Lily had written 2 words in her wobbly 6-year-old handwriting: "Thank you." Emma's throat tightened as she traced the lines of the drawing with her finger. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you think we'll ever see it again?" Lily asked, tilting her head. Emma hesitated, glancing out the window at the snowy landscape. I don't know, she admitted. But even if we don't, I think it'll always be with us. Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Like magic, she said. Like magic, Emma agreed, pulling her daughter into a hug. That night, as Emma tucked Lily into bed, she found herself gazing out the window once more. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the snow-covered world. She thought of all the things she couldn't explain, the way the cat had appeared in the storm, the unwavering confidence with which it had led them to safety, and the quiet courage it had shown in the face of danger. She didn't need to understand it, not completely. Some miracles weren't meant to be dissected or rationalized. They were simply meant to be felt, cherished, and carried in your heart. Emma knelt by Lily's bed, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face as she slept. Thank you, she whispered softly, her words a prayer, a promise, and a hope, all wrapped into one. And somewhere, out in the vast snowy forest, a pair of bright green eyes watched from the shadows before disappearing into the night.